So.
Yeah, but that's what that's exactly.
Separation anxiety started with him around like 6 months, like he lost his mind, and it's still not that I'm right. He still will try
But I
fixes. We do it, but like he still tries.
Good morning, Joe. Commander.
That's much better. Hey, nice to see you.
Were it not for COVID, I would ask you all to scrunch in a little more and get closer, but I think this works for this year. I want to open up by talking about how and why this monument is here. If you recall, the day after 9/11, newspapers, including the New York Post, ran full-page color photographs of that searing image we will never forget on the front page. And on the back page was a full-color photograph of the American flag. One of our Boy Scouts, Josh Doying, took that newspaper and taped it on his window so that he would remember this day. 1 year later, on the first anniversary of 9/11, he looked at that photograph and saw how it had faded. And he wondered if people's memories, like that photograph, might fade with time as well. As a result, he came to the Boy Scouts and said, "My Eagle project will be to construct a monument so that people's memories will not fade like that photograph." Josh went out and raised the money, organized the work crew, and got all of this done without any public funds whatsoever. And that is how we ended up with this monument here, because of the efforts of a Darien High School Boy Scout, Eagle Scout from Troop 53. This is Josh Doying's gift to the town. Before we begin, I just want to recognize that in addition to all of our local officials who are always supportive of everything we do, we also are honored to have in our presence today Congressman Jim Himes, State Representatives Terry Wood and Matt Blumenthal. I didn't see State Senator Bob Duff, but I believe he is coming. I don't see him. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. Those of us who were alive that day and who were in New York will never forget what we saw. But everybody in the Darien school system today, right through high school, not a single one of them was alive that day. So to them, 9/11 is a story, much like the JFK assassination, like Hiroshima, like Pearl Harbor. It's something they read in a history book with a photograph. But do they know the stories behind the story? Do they know that when those buildings were burning, and thousands of people were running out to safety, that 1,000 or more firefighters, police officers, and EMS technicians were running into harm's way to save those who were still in the building? And do they know that of the 2,977 people who died that day in New York, Among them were 412 of that stalwart group that ran into the building. Think about the sacrifice that they made to save how many other people as a result of what they did. Do those students know that even though that attack was on America, that there were people from 77 different countries? Every religion had a congregant who died that day. Do they know that black people, yellow people, red people, white people, brown people all died that day? Do they know that in addition to the 6 Darien dads who did not come home, do they know that all of us lost grandparents, brothers and sisters, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, neighbors, and friends? Do they know how personal it was to everyone? Something for us to talk about at family dinner tonight, to have them recognize that there are stories behind the story. And with that, I would like to invite our first selectman, Jamie Stevenson, to come up and share a few thoughts today. Jamie?
Good morning. Thank you all for gathering here today. I have to read my remarks this morning because it's a difficult morning for many. We felt the anxiety leading up to this day, haven't we? How is it possible that 20 years have passed since that tragic morning? A beautiful blue sky day just like today. I see it in your faces, in my husband's eyes this morning. The memory of 2,997 innocent lost souls who were our loved ones, our friends, our colleagues. A senseless, unthinkable tragedy. Each of us has a deeply personal memory of 9/11. We know exactly where we were as we watched in disbelief the planes hit the towers and then their collapse. Panicked phone calls were made, parents rushed to collect their children from school, and our incredible first responders did as they always do, prepared to run straight into unknown danger to save lives. And our stories continued to unfold for days, weeks, and months as we tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. Even today, I searched the New York skyline for those towers, once an iconic symbol of American exceptionalism, only to see the void. But something else happened that day. Something miraculous grew from those dark days. We came together as one community, united by caring and compassion for one another and this great nation. The sense of love and pride for America was palpable. Hope began to rise from the ashes, that our nation would emerge even stronger yet. So today, as we hold in our hearts the treasured memories of our lost loved ones and friends, and as we honor the service and sacrifice of our first responders, let us also remember that we are one nation under God and indivisible only if we set aside our differences to uphold America's most precious blessings, liberty and justice for all. Tell your stories. Pray for our brave soldiers who for 20 years and to the very last moment gave their lives in the name of freedom. Keep the memory of 9/11 alive. We must never forget. God bless America.
Thank you, Jamie. Not that I notified these individuals, they were going to be called upon to do this, but if I can ask Congressman Himes, State Representatives Terry Wood and Matt Blumenthal, and State Senator Bob Duff, if he's here, to please grab the memorial wreath and bring it up alongside the monument, please.
We get State Senator Pat Miller too.
Is she here? Patricia Miller? Philly Patricia Miller? Here she is. They place it on either side of it. Thank you. So, I know in New York, they read the names of the individuals who perished that day. 6 dads from Darien did not return home that day. We do not read their names here for several reasons. One of the widows specifically requested we not do it the first year afterward. Some of those families have moved away. Other families who experienced loss that day have moved in. Many among us lost relatives and friends who don't live in town. So we felt it was appropriate for us to not use individual names here today. And that's a tradition that we have carried on for these 20 years. In addition to the stories about 9/11, it's also about the story of what's happened in the last 20 years. Among the questions to ask our children who were not yet born that day, are they aware that an additional 2,000 people have died since 9/11 from 9/11? Including an additional 400 plus police officers and firefighters, as many who died that day have since died from that day. That an additional 10,000 first responders and construction workers who worked on Ground Zero that day have contracted cancer from that day and are very much at risk, and that the dying continues today and will go on for some time. So when we observe a minute of silence, which, according to my clock, we might actually have to pretend we're going to be a little fast and do it a minute or two early. But when we observe the minute of silence, in addition to mourning those we lost and having the sympathy for their family, to think about those who are still dying and their families as well. So, with that in mind, I don't think anybody will mind if we have our minute of silence 5 minutes early. So, even though it's only 8:41 now, 8:46 is when that first plane hit. So at this moment, I would like to invite those individuals who have been given a rose to kindly step forward and place the rose standing up on the memorial. Thank you. In closing, I would just add one more thought. When I mentioned earlier about telling the children who were not yet born about the stories of that day, I'd also encourage you to share with them the stories of 9/12 and 9/13 and 9/14. Do you remember what those days were like? Do you remember that on those days in New York City, nobody bumped into you on the sidewalk? People were nice to strangers. Cabs didn't run red lights. Drivers didn't honk their horns. People made allowances for other people. Homeless people living on the street who the day before had been viewed by those more fortunate as bums, now were eerily reminiscent of the ghost-like figures who escaped Lower Manhattan that day. People treated each other with kindness and compassion, even if they didn't know one another. That day there were no Democrats, there were no Republicans, there were no blacks, there were no whites, there were no gays, there were no straights. There were only Americans. Do you remember how good that felt? So my challenge for each of us is, what can we do to recapture that sentiment, to carry it forward? What can we do that is extraordinary, that will make us not only remember 9/11, but to remember 9/12 and who we are and what we can be? That's my thought, and I would like to close, as I did last year, with a lyric written by Marvin Gaye, Ronaldo Brown, and Al Cleveland. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. Mother, 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 there's far too many of you crying. We've got to find a way to bring some loving to this world today, for only love can conquer hate. Thank you all for coming today.